introduce yourselves in the chat. Again, your name, your pronouns, location, and church name. So grateful that each and every single one of you are here with us this afternoon. Go ahead, we are recording, so hit that blue button, got it, just to understand that we're recording for the content portion of the session today. I'll give a few more housekeeping tips around recording a little bit later. So my name is Reverend Laura Kigweba James. I serve at the General Board of Church and Society of the United Methodist Church as the Director of Grassroots Organizing. My pronouns are she and her, and I'm joining you all today from the United Methodist Building, which is located on the traditional and ancestral homelands of the Anacostans and Nacotchtank peoples of Washington, also known as Washington, D.C. So welcome to the Wednesday Witness Skill Building Series. This series was created for United Methodist to build capacity and knowledge to advocate for justice with your decision makers. This is a 4-part series where we will use Church and Society Civic Engagement Toolkit to do a deep dive into organizing and advocacy tactics for social change. So each session will be given with instructions, followed by small group breakout sessions where you'll be able to practice and share with other United Methodists who are ready to create social change. I think that's one of my favorite things about the skill building session is for you all to connect. And globally, we had some folks who registered from across the connection. So I'm excited for those conversations. So just a few things to be aware of during this session. Again, all of the session content will be recorded and available for later viewing on the Church and Society YouTube page. However, the question and answer, breakout time, and discussions will not be recorded. There are so many of us on the call, which is great. So please stay muted until we move into small groups for further sharing and practice. So if you have questions during the session, please share them in the Q&A box, or you can drop them in the chat. We'll do our best to keep track of both. And if you have questions, suggestions, or need further support for any of the material shared during this series, please email me at lkjames@umcjustice.org. That's lkjames@umcjustice.org. So before we jump into today's session, I would like to ground us in John Wesley's theological vision that calls us to the ministry of justice. John Wesley writes that there is no religion but social, no holiness but social holiness. So as people of faith, we do not exist by ourselves, but we live socially in relationship with God, each other, and all of creation. So at this time, I encourage you to switch your Zoom view from speaker view to gallery view, if you can do that. And I invite you to turn your cameras on. No pressure to do this if you're on the move or you do not feel camera ready, I understand. But let us switch on our cameras so that we may see one another, fellow siblings in Christ, gathered on this call for the purpose to live our faith, to seek justice, and to pursue peace. Hello, everyone. Good to see you. This is great. Awesome. Welcome, welcome, welcome. So for a moment, let us take in the presence of one another here. Let us recognize that each of us are connected to churches, to communities. We exist in a specific context. And the living, breathing Spirit of God has called each of us, just as we are, to engage in the ongoing ministry of Jesus Christ for the transformation of the world. So as United Methodists, we affirm in our faith that our commitment to transformation through the ministry of justice is not by ourselves, but socially, in relationship with God, through the presence of the Holy Spirit, Jesus Christ, each other, even virtually, and all of creation. Together we are called. Together we will transform the world. Amen. So I'm gonna start sharing my screen now. Just give me a moment. One second. Okay. Are you all just able to see you good with everyone can see my screen? Okay.
Yes.
All right. So go ahead and mute yourselves. Thank you so much for letting me know that. We're just going to keep on moving through. So the focus of today's session will be on formulating your story to create change, where we'll talk about how to share your story to create change. So we're going to start with talking about what change is, move into the actual concrete of storytelling, how to share our stories for change. Then we'll move into a time of question and answer, breakouts, and we will close in prayer. So with creating change, so each of us has a vision of what change looks like in our communities. But there's this question of how do we get there? How do we achieve that vision? So I want you to take a moment, think to yourself, how do you understand that change happens? How does change happen? And go ahead and drop it in the chat. How do you believe that change happens? I'll give you a second to do that. And there's no right or wrong answer. Just having a hard time seeing the chat, but okay. Okay, we'll keep moving. Okay. Thank you all for sharing. Unfortunately, I can't see my chat, so I'm going to keep on moving. And we'll come back to those comments. Thank you for your patience as I deal with tech on my end. But yes, with all that you've named, I'm sure that some of you have named around mission and outreach, organizing and advocacy, just for you all to know that there are various perspectives of change. So most of us are familiar with the first, which is direct service, which understands change by addressing the immediate need of impacted communities through mission and outreach programs. And there's another vision of change that is called self-help or community development that envisions and understands change by providing specific investments for an individual and a community. And then there's activism, which has this perspective of change by mobilizing the masses on specific issues to raise public attention and awareness. And advocacy, right, which is something that we lead here at Church and Society that envisions change by focusing on addressing social issues on behalf of communities with decision makers. And then there is organizing, the department and program that I lead. And organizing understands that change happens through and with people. Organizing is a strategic process of building power with the most impacted people to influence systemic change. So after I've shared these different perspectives of change, I'm really curious for you all, which of these perspectives reflects how you engage in creating change in your community? Go ahead and share it in the chat. Are you more around direct service? Are you more with self-help? Are you engaged in advocacy and organizing? Are you an activist? How are you creating change in your communities? Go ahead and share it in the chat. Awesome. Awesome. Thank you. Thank you for sharing. So each of these perspectives is important. And just like we are communal in the ways of our holiness and our faith, each of these perspectives of change are required to create transformation. So at Church and Society, we understand that change happens through advocacy and organizing. And we are committed to equipping you all as United Methodists to effectively build power to influence your decision makers. So as United Methodists, we affirm in our social principles that the church should continually exert a strong ethical influence upon the state, supporting policies and programs deemed to be just, and opposing policies and programs that are unjust. We are the church. Again, we are the church. And our social teachings and principles call us as the church to influence not just in our local communities, but our society by supporting, advocating for just and equitable policies and programs. And the best way to share our support and vision for justice is to share our story. So one of the most effective tools in advocacy and organizing is being able to communicate why. Why do you care about an issue? How does that issue impact you and your community? And how do you envision changing the system to reflect a divine vision of justice? So community organizer and professor Marshall Gans says that stories not only teach us how to act, they inspire us to act. So as people of faith, we know this to be true through the life, ministry, death, and resurrection of Jesus Christ, who shared stories that affirmed the dignity and sacredness of community, that challenged systemic injustice, and called forth a kingdom vision that continues to transform lives today. Stories are powerful and effective in creating change. So how do we formulate our story for change that effectively builds power and influences the actions of our decision makers? So the most important thing to remember when we're communicating our stories for change is that we are the experts. When speaking with decision makers over the phone in their offices, or even calling for community action in a public witness, know that you are the expert of your story. No one else can tell your story besides you. So share it and share it boldly. So in the Civic Engagement Toolkit, we instruct you to begin formulating your story for change by beginning with reflection. So there's about 4 different questions that should frame a story for change. So the first is really to begin by asking yourselves, what experiences have shaped you, and why have you been called to respond to this justice issue at this moment? So when you registered today, there was a big list of all the issues that we cover here at Church and Society. And so really to consider when you are reflecting on why you are called to this specific issue. Why is it this specific issue that you are called to change? So the second question is, how is your experience connected with others in the community? How is your experience, your response to justice connected to folks who you may not look like you, may be from a different part of the community that you're in, but all of the issues that we cover here at Church and Society are intersectional. So it's this question of who may be missing from the conversation, who may be missing from my own story that I need to be aware of, that I need to incorporate. Another question is, how does your faith and value system inform your response to justice issues? How does our faith, we have our social teachings and social principles, they inform our call to respond to justice. How is that a part of your story? And then the last, which is the most important, is what is the collective call to action that you and the community are hoping for? When you envision what change looks like, when you envision what divine justice can be here and now, what is that call to action that you're asking of your decision makers, or that you're asking of the public? These questions are helpful in forming our story for change. So taking the time to write and reflect on these questions will give you the clarity to effectively communicate your story to decision makers. So throughout the skill building series, we'll focus on different advocacy and organizing tactics to use to share your story. But the most important is to be confident in knowing and communicating your story, which is a key building block for transformative change. So after you've spent some time in reflection, it's time to get clear about where and how you'll communicate your story. So here are a few best practices. So your goal, be clear about what you want to accomplish in sharing your story. What is it that you're hoping to achieve in communicating your experience and the experience of the community? Understanding your goal will help you know where to share your story effectively. So once you know your story, once you're clear about your goal, you can engage multiple audience with your story. But it's important to define your audience and be aware of your setting, because your story may need to be shared differently, whether you're visiting a member of Congress's office, you're talking to your city council member, or you're at a prayer vigil. You need to be conscious about where is it that you're sharing your story. In either setting, you are creating change through your story, but it's always important to be clear about who you are speaking to. Be authentic. As you share, remember you are the expert of your story. Authentically, speak authentically from your experience and your own vision of change. Only you have it. And that is the most important story to share. Share inspiration. As Marshall Gans says, stories not only teach us how to act, they inspire us to act. So as you share your story, make sure you highlight the people, the values that have inspired your call and vision for justice. Our Christian values and United Methodists social teachings and principles ground our call to action and should be shared. Challenge others is another important practice. So in telling our stories for change, we share a vision of justice that our faith calls for and that we long for. As we engage decision makers, the media, public attention, we can challenge others to reconsider their ideas, opinions, or beliefs that reflect a vision of justice that we all deserve. Don't be afraid to challenge others when you share your story. Rather, lean in to the challenge, because it can be an invitation to others who are ready to make a difference. Stay focused. So this is often a challenge for me, and this is often why I need an outline, because I can get distracted. But often when sharing our own experiences or the experiences of others, we can get off track. So we must remember that we have a goal in sharing our story. We want to create systemic change. So staying focused and concise when we communicate our story is the best way to inspire others and influence change. And the last, which is pretty important, is to practice, practice, practice. Taking the time to reflect, write, rehearse your story calms your nerves, organizes your thoughts to help you effectively communicate your story. And over time, as you share your story, you'll become more comfortable and settled that you will begin equipping others and telling their story to create change. So I hope these reflection questions, best tips for best practices, can begin to help you effectively communicate your story for change. So if you're looking for further resources on storytelling for change, here are a few to explore that I love. Marshall Gann's public narrative. There is a link that should be dropped in the chat. Thank you, Larry. Ethical storytelling principles for our climate voices that really gets to the ethics of storytelling. Center for Story-Based Strategy and storycenter.org. So in our organizing trainings at Church and Society, we include a storytelling for change training that incorporates both the public narrative and ethical storytelling. Even in the civic engagement toolkit and the reflection questions that I shared with you, there is kind of this inspiration of how the public story informs those reflections as well. So just know that those are resources that are available, and I'm happy to talk with you more if you would like to go through those resources. So feel free to email me again at lkjames@umcjustice.org. So I just want to affirm that today's session is the first of 4. Our next session will be Wednesday, March 8th, 2023, connecting with decision makers through calling. So in this specific session, we'll identify best practices for a successful call with your decision makers. And here are the other dates. So May 3rd and June 6th as well. You can go ahead and save the dates and put those on your calendars for some upcoming trainings. And there's also a link to our webpage that shows the different upcoming skill building series and a description for each one. So if you're eager to take action and cannot wait a month between sessions, I do encourage you to visit our Take Action page where you can take actions on all of the legislative priorities that were named last month. So we currently have one for climate, health, poverty, peace, and immigration. But if you go to the link in the chat, all of our Take Action alerts that are emails that go directly to your member of Congress, or you can create your own. Those are available on our website. And I encourage you to take a chance, get engaged, and create change. So I'm going to stop sharing my screen. And if there are any questions, this will be the time to ask. All right, we're going to keep on moving. If there are questions that happen, feel free to drop those in the chat. So we are going to move into a time of small groups. And this will be a chance for you to kind of share your own reflections around why you're called to the specific justice issue that you're focused on, how is that reflected in your community, and what's the specific call to action that you and your community are working towards. So we're gonna, in this session, you'll have 20 minutes in smaller groups to really kind of put together this framework and share. You don't have to have your story all figured out. This is more of a conversation for you all to just begin to practice with. But before we move into the small groups, I do just want us to reflect on some shared agreements about moving into conversation together. And I am gonna share my screen. Okay. So just want to invite us in this time to stay open and curious, to share with love and respect, to share what you want to share based on your comfort level. This isn't a time for you to share your whole life story, but to be really, again, to stay focused and concise on why are you called to respond to this particular justice issue? How are you engaged? How's your community engaged? Continue to practice to be specific and concise. And then to just be mindful of others. We have a good group today, so it'll just be you and one other person, but just be mindful of time because you both will have 10 minutes to share. And if everyone agrees to that, can I either get a thumbs up or just kind of say yes in the chat so that we are sharing these agreements? Yay. I can see the chat now. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Okay. All right. All right, Larry, can you go ahead and share the questions in the chat so people have them before they move into small groups? Great. So feel free to copy those questions before, because I know sometimes when breakout sessions happen, the chat changes. So feel free to copy those questions. I'll give you a second to do that. If you're not, the questions should stay there when you move into breakouts. And again, please introduce yourselves, name, location, your church name, or just where you're serving in ministry. I think the best part about these skill ups is that we can connect across the connection. And so we'll move into breakout.